Psalm 86, There is None Like You. I was a little troubled by Robert Alter's introduction. So some of you know Robert Alter, the great professor of literature at Berkeley, who just finished translating the entire Tanakh, a 25-year project. Here's what he says at the beginning. The poem begins with a formula of the Psalms of supplication, and this psalm is highly formulaic from beginning to end. A reader who has been going through the book of Psalms in sequence by this point will have encountered almost every line of this poem with minor variations elsewhere. Now, when I got to the end of that introduction by Robert Alter, I thought, well, why bother? I mean, if Psalm 86 seems to be simply a collage of what came before. And in the careful study of the psalm, particularly with the help of the writing of Benjamin Siegel, but with all the many commentaries I turned to, what I found is a psalm remarkably woven. And so the focus of our study today of Psalm 86, more than in other psalms, will be showing how purposefully this psalm is woven. And there are changes here, and that is also quite remarkable. So I just want to pause to recognize Steve, who's here to honor his wife Phyllis on this day. And I'm going to bring up this psalm, and then we'll go through it with my being able to point out how remarkable the weave is. But here's the thing to know. The psalm is essentially divided into two parts. Part 1 to 7 will be reasons to help me. And then the second section will have 3 parts, each essentially 2 verses and a summary, 2 verses and a summary, and then a closing that gets a specific request. So again, what I am taken by, as I'll share with you, is how purposeful the repetition of words are in this psalm, and how, again, I delight in it. The first thing to note, even before I again get it to reading, is this psalm is entitled Tfilah LeDavid, a prayer of David. That's an expression that only appears in one other psalm, and that's Psalm 17 at the beginning, though there will be 3 other psalms, meaning a total of 5, that have this word prayer as part of the introduction. But specific, and one of them, Psalm 90, is a prayer of Moses. This one is distinctly a prayer for David. The other thing that's kind of noteworthy is we've been reading Korach Psalms, 84 and 85, and 87 and 88 will be Korach Psalms. And in the middle of those Korach Psalms is this Psalm of David. In the 3rd book of Psalms, which is Psalms 73 to 89, the traditional rabbinic breaking of the book of Psalms into 5, just like the 5 books of Moses, this is the only psalm that has this dedication of David. So we, in the 1st book of Psalms, had lots of David psalms, same in the 2nd. This is the only one in the 3rd book, which is also to say, next week we'll move on to the 4th book. We're making progress. Okay, that as introduction, the psalm. A prayer of David. Incline your ear, Adonai, and answer me, for poor and needy am I. Guard my spirit, for devotee am I. Deliver your servant, for you are my God, who trusts you. Be gracious to me, my supreme, for to you I call out all the day. Rejoice the soul of your servant, For to you, my supreme, my spirit I lift up. For you, my supreme, are good and forgiving, and of abundant kindness to all who call upon you. Give ear, Adonai, to my prayer, and attend to the voice of my pleas for grace. In the day of my straits, in the day of my strait, I will call upon you, for you will answer me. There is none like you among the gods, my supreme, and there are no works like yours. All nations whom you have made will come about before you, my supreme, and glorify your name. For great are you, who does wondrous things. You are God, you alone. Ata Elohim levadecha. Teach me, Adonai, your way, so I may walk in your truth. Unify my heart to fear your name. I will thank you, my supreme, my God, with all my heart, and I will glorify your name forever. For your kindness is great upon me, and you have saved my spirit from Sheol's depths. God, the arrogant have risen upon me, and a gang of the violent seek my spirit, those whom have not set you before them. But you, my supreme, are a God of compassion and grace, slow to anger and abundant in kindness and truth. Turn to me and be gracious to me. Grant your strength to your servant and deliver the child of your maidservant. Make for me a sign for good, that those who hate me may see it and be ashamed. For you, Adonai, have helped me and comforted me. And so now for the elegance of construction. Some things to know in terms of the framing. I mentioned that the first section is 1 to 7, and the opening inclusio, the key words that are found in 1 and 7 are answer me, aneni, and you get that in 7, ta'aneni, answer me. You have also the word ki, for I am poor, but the word for, ki, I am poor and needy am I. And again, the first section, ki ta'aneni, for you will answer me. When I call to you, ekra echa, and that's the theme here of lend your ear, incline your ear, Adonai. So that too is that sense of that being a unit. The thing that gets repeated over and over in this section is the word ki, the word for I am. It's like why, incline your ear, Adonai, and answer me, and then for, because I am poor and needy. And you'll get that same word, ki, in verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7. So every verse, except for 6, will have this word ki. And the nature of this first part of the psalm is God, it's deeply personal. And a key word in verse 3, chaneni, be gracious to me. Chen means to give, expecting nothing in return. In the Talmud, they'll point out that there is a relationship between chen in Brachot 7a and chinam. Chinam means free. Even though I may not have merits to pay for your kindness, nonetheless, you are gracious. And this word chen in verse 3 will echo as we move toward the very end, where we'll add in verse 16 and verse 15, Chanun, and Chaneni. But in the beginning, the focus is less on chen, meaning God's giving, expecting nothing in return, or unmerited giving. Then, why, God, you should pay attention to me. Incline your ear, Adonai, and answer me, for poor and needy am I. Now, ani ve'avion, we're told repeatedly in the Torah, have God's ear. We are to pay attention to the poor and needy. A judge is to be particularly caring for the poor and the needy. And so we're saying, God, what you say we should do and what you say you do, well, that's one of me. That's who I am. So answer me, because I am poor and needy. Now again, poor and needy might begin with the physical. That's a possibility, though it will not be said again. So it's a beginning point, but then it'll move to, if you will, the spiritual. And therefore, some of the commentators will even understand poor and needy as not a physical description, but poor of spirit and needy of spirit. And that's possible. Guard my spirit, for a devotee am I. This word chassid. So when we get chassidut, for instance, the idea of to call oneself a chassid, as in Hasidism later, will be here as an example. For God, guard my spirit, because I am devoted to you. You are my God. I trust in you. So be reciprocal. As I am devoted to you and trust in you, well, take care of me. And now the third, be gracious to me, my supreme, for to you I call out all day. Another way of saying, God, it's only you that I call out to. And even though I may be short in merit, at the core of my merit is that I turn toward you. So be gracious to me. 4, rejoice the soul of your servant. And again, for to you, my supreme, my spirit, I lift up. Why should you rejoice, my soul? My spirit? I'm going to have to change this. Rejoice the spirit of your servant, which means because my spirit is directed to you. I raise up my potential. I raise up myself to you. Verse 5, another key. For you, my supreme, are good and forgiving, and of abundant kindness to all who call upon you. And now again, Ibn Ezra, I paid particular attention to Ibn Ezra today. He will say this description in verse 5. Tov v'salach v'rav chesed l'chol korecha. That has a echoing that we'll see of Exodus 34:6. But Ibn Ezra will say this is the comprehensive description of God's caregiving nature. Verse 5. And now, give ear. That goes back to verse 1. Again, this is a unit of 1 to 7, so we're drawing to the close. Give ear, Adonai. This is kind of a summary, verses 6 and 7. To my prayer, attend to the voice of my pleas for grace. Again, that word grace. In the day of my strait, I will call upon you, for you will answer me. Now check out that's part 1. And you can see how it's woven. There's a rhythm to it with that reoccurring 6 times, that word key. Personal. God, tend to me. We're not told how or why. We're not given a context as to a particular problem. Some commentators will say, because it's a David psalm, it's David with the threats of Saul, or the threats of David with Achitophel. But those are just kind of surmises of key moments in David's life. We're not told what the threat is. We're just have in verses 1 to 7 a prayer of tend to me because I am true to you. And now verses 8 to 10 is the first of these three subsets of the second half. And now that famous line from our service. I will add verse 5, Ki atah Adonai tov v'salach v'rav chesed l'chol korecha, is also a line in our liturgy. It's in the prayer Uva L'Tzion. And I'll add, Ein Kemocha Elohim is not only when we open the ark normally, but it's also the first of the Simchat Torah Hakafot, perhaps in part because we're opening the ark. And so verses 8 to 10, now this is universal. Verses 8 to 10 is a description of the God Supreme. And it's done as verses 8 and 10 are chiasmic, A, B, B, A. So there is none like you among the gods, my supreme, A. B, there are no works like yours. And then 10 starts with works. For great are you who does wondrous works. You are God, you alone. So you are God, you are alone is the parallel to Mi Chamocha. To this, there is none like you. And so in the middle of that, A, B, B, A, acknowledging God's universal uniqueness, is this messianic quality. Also emphasizing in the middle God's universality. All nations whom you have made. And the key word that's repeated in verses 8, 9, and 10 all have this word ma'asecha. You are a God of doing. You have all nations whom you have made will come about before you, my supreme, and glorify your name. With again, bracketed or framed, this messianic image, which commentators like Radak and Malbim will say is pointing to the messianic future by God's uniqueness. And now the next subset of the second section is verses 11 and 13. And note that each of the sections have this word key, that word for. So the last line of each, remember I said that the first section is 8 to 10. 10 will have the word key, for great are you. Now 11 to 13 is the next subsection. And here too, verse 13 will begin, key, for, such is your kindness. And this next subsection focuses on the personal connection between the speaker and God. But this is my relationship with you. Teach me, Adonai, your ways, so I may walk in your truth. Unify my heart to fear your name. I will thank you, my supreme, my God, with all my heart, and I will glorify your name forever. For your kindness is great upon me, and you have saved my spirit from Sheol's depths. Now here, look at verses 11 and 12. The lead-in, by the way, has verse 10. Staying focused, 11 and 13, 11 and 12 have two key words in common, livavi and shemecha, my heart and your name. That's what this middle section, 2b, section 2b, verses 11 and 13, that's the key motif. My heart, your name. Your name refers to Yud He Vav He. And here's a unique phrase, Yached Livavi, which is unify my heart, unite my heart. There's a lot of commentaries on what it means to have a united heart. And verse 12, we get B'chol Livavi, with all my heart. And again, Shimcha, your name, is in verses 11 and 12. Teach me, and I will be grateful. With all my heart, I say there's a lot of commentaries. That's the quality of being united in one's heart, or if you will, a quality of mindfulness, where all of one's being is focused on God, not distracted by financial, not distracted by yearnings, not distracted by the Yetzer Hara. This double Vav in 11 and 12 for Livavi, my heart, is an added Vav. It appears elsewhere. So Deuteronomy 6:5, V'hafta Elohecha b'chol livavcha, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Deuteronomy 6:5, right after the Shema. There will be in the Sifrei, the commentary to Deuteronomy, the comment that there's two Vavs because we have two inclinations, the inclination of selfishness and the inclination of altruism. Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hatov, both are present in the service of God. And now, verse 13 kind of sums it up. For your kindness is great upon me, and you have saved my spirit from Sheol's depths. Rashi will comment, this is a David prayer, why the depths of Sheol, the lowest part, the nethermost parts of the underworld? Because for adultery, that's Leviticus 20:10, death is the penalty. Rashi will say this is in reference to Bathsheba. But that's, again, a commentary. Back to the structure. And that is verses now 14 and 13. 14 begins the final section, but there's a key word here in 13 and 14 that bridges, and that key word is alai, upon me. So in verse 13, great is your kindness upon me. In 14, the same word is the arrogant have risen upon me. So there's now the segue from a description of God's goodness to the threat, but using the same word, alai. Again, I'm just fascinated and honoring the weave poetically. And now verses 14 is the specific request, and that's the last phase of the psalm, of this prayer. God, the arrogant have risen upon me, and a gang of the violent seek my spirit, those who have not set you before them. That's always the image, that those who don't have God before them, unlike the psalmist, feel free to do whatever they want, have no constraints. But you, my supreme, are a God of compassion and grace, slow to anger and abundant in kindness and truth. That, of course, is a phrase that is familiar to many of us from our prayers from Torah, Exodus 34:6. And here's the key change. It's in God's description after having forgiven the people for the golden calf. God does a self-description. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet. But here, there's one, it's all that quote of God's description, of self-description. But here, instead of Adonai, Adonai, Yud He Vav He, Yud He Vav He, here it's made even more personal. But you, va'ata Adonai, are my supreme. And so that's the key change. And now, turn to me and be gracious to me. Grant your strength to your servant and deliver the child of your maidservant. Two names of servants here in 16. One is male, essentially, the other female. Robert Alter would say they're just parallelisms. But the medieval commentators will point out that an avadecha is one who is a servant by choice. Ben amatecha is one who is born of a servant mother, meaning I was born into this state, and contrasting the two. Commentators will also point out how saying of himself that he is God's servant is high status. We're told of only two people explicitly in the Torah that they are God's servants. This again is a prayer of David. Psalm 89:4, we'll yet get to it, will have a line, Karati Brit, I have cut a covenant, Nishbati, and I so swore, LeDavid Avdi, to David my servant. And it'll say regarding Moses, Numbers 12, verse 7, that he was my servant, God speaking of Moses' uniqueness, which will get repeated in Joshua 1:2. So the notion of being God's servant, turn to me and be gracious to me, grant your strength to your servant, is aspirational. It's a high bar to be God's servant and deliver the child of your maidservant. Commentators will also play with, the Zohar will comment that David identifies himself by his mother, not by his father. And in the Talmud, she's actually given a name, Natsevet bat Adiel. Adael, that's David's mother. We know his father is Yishai. And the Zohar will say, well, that's because David can be sure of knowing who his mother is, and therefore he honors her in this moment. And the closing line, make for me a sign for good, that those who hate me may see it and be ashamed. For you, Adonai, have helped me and comforted me. That's the specific request that the entire prayer has led to. Make for me a sign, an oath. Some translated as make for me a miracle. Oath l'tovah. Oath can be a sign or a miracle, that those who hate me, we may see it and be ashamed. For you, Adonai, have helped me and comforted me. And we don't know how that gets fulfilled, though Rashi, France, again, 11th century, commenting in the Talmud, Shabbat 30a, will say that during the dedication of the temple, the gates refused to open until the merit of David was invoked. And that was the sign that David was forgiven to all who would say, well, you know, David, God had rejected him. He was, after all, an adulterer. And so here, this is a prayer of David in its introduction. That, of course, doesn't mean necessarily that it was composed by David, but David becomes the model king and also the one who had troubles in his life, and becomes a model of prayer. So to summarize, there is a very distinctive flow and purposefulness to the weave of this psalm. It'll close in terms of the words used with aneni, answer me, which is in the beginning, and oznecha, toward the end, and listen to me. Well, it'll close, scratch that. The punchline will stand on its own as the punchline, with the key word to circle here again, aseh, make for me. and the quality of that's what it would mean to be answered by God. Much more to say about this. Let me just add one other thing. There are echoes in this psalm, as Robert Alter pointed out, of previous psalms. I just want to point out a couple. Verse 14, interestingly, is almost identical to Psalm 54:5, with one key difference. Here in verse 14, it's Zadim, and in Psalm 54:5, it's Zarim. The difference being this one letter and this little shmitchik here. So modern commentators will say it's a scribal error. Others will say there are different messages. Okay, there's so much more to share, but I want to hear what you have to share. I'm delighted to see some new people. I want to wave back to Sharon Hurwich to welcome you and to say good morning to Ahuva and Susie and Julia and Mary and so many more. Welcome back, Jackie. What questions or comments do you have about Psalm 86? What did it evoke in you? Arnold, go right ahead.
Well, for me, verse 14 and 17 are kind of the key. I have this image of someone who is being taunted, tormented for his faith, to the point where he can't help himself. You know, there's a phrase, God helps those who help themselves. And he's brought to such a low point that he has nowhere to go. He doesn't know what to do. All he can do is pray. That's kind of the image that I have of the psalm. And perhaps the writer.
I think that's really beautiful in a variety of ways what Arnold shares. This is, again, that rare psalm that's called a prayer. And what Arnold says is, in fact, it's a prayer because this psalmist feels somehow taunted, and all he can do in response, because there's nothing specific that's being described, other than feeling as if it's the arrogant who are shaming him, is pray to God, and pray to God to say, show them something, a sign, so they'll leave me alone and know that what seems to be the case is he's taunted for his faith in God, because he'll refer to these people who taunt him, the Zadim, as those who don't honor you. And I am a chassid. I am a loyal one to you. So all I can do, God, is pray to you that you will vindicate my faith in you. So I, again, value the context, which again is that of straits, but straits of on some level having been taunted and needing to pray. Other reactions or comments? So if you do, Ahuva, just unmute yourself.
So far, as I can remember, this is the most personal prayer that I have ever read. It's David does not say, please help me because I'm going to sacrifice for you. I'm going to praise you at the temple or wherever I'm at the gates. I'm going to offer you libation. He doesn't, except for verse 12, he said, I will praise you forever. But it's such deep humility that just hurts you right in your heart. And it's very emotional and very personal.
Yeah.
Very meaningful, I think, for everybody.
So I just want to echo and build on Ahuva's insight. You know, the last word in verse 1 that then is repeated in verse 2 is the word ani, am I, meaning that this is deeply about my opening my heart to you, God. And as Ahuva emphasizes, although the psalmist is describing his loyalty to God, he's not really asking anything except that last verse. This is a deeply personal expression of, God, I turn to you in prayer because I trust you. That's the key line through the psalm. And as Ahuva emphasizes, as a result, really feels like prayer. It really feels deeply personal and not asking for much. But I will point out there is tension at the same time for later readers. For instance, when David says of himself in verse 2, Ki chasid ani, for I am a chasid. Now, that can be understood as I am devoted to you, which can be positive, but others will say, how can somebody call themselves a chassid? I think that those people, in contrast to how Ahuva is reading it, are overreading that self-description. He's not proclaiming his goodness, he's rather describing his loyalty, his faithfulness. And in that sense, he's not extolling himself, rather, which again, for some is attention. Instead, as I read it, he's simply saying, you are the God of covenant, of loyalty. I am loyal to you. Deeply personal, giving context for why I call upon you, God. Another comment I see, Shula? Go ahead.
Actually, am I muted? Yes.
No, you're good now.
Yeah. To build on what Ahuva was saying, because I was feeling exactly the same thing, that it was personal, but a musical term came into my mind. And that is that there actually is a real crescendo to be seen here. In the beginning, he identifies, it's David speaking, listen to me, lend me your ear. And then still remaining sedentary, saying, guard my soul because I am your biggest fan. You know, I'm an adherent. But then sort of more and more come these words of action. Chaneni, samach nafshi, ha'azina, again, aneni, etc. All these, and more and more and more. So it is really like a person who is working themselves up as they are expressing the prayer, starting with ID and then letting loose.
So I like that very much. And it evokes for me, in terms of the trajectory that Cantor Shula just described, a pause to share with you as well what is the middle, the bullseye of the psalm. It's verse 10. The very center of the psalm says, Ki gadol ata, for great are you, v'osei niflaot, who does wondrous things. And that's the key mood here of this psalm. It's one of acknowledging the key word is you. The key word, smack in the middle of this psalm, is the word you. That again is the sense of intimacy. I am with you, God, who does. And the middle, that section, verses 8 to 10, describes God in the universal dimensions of the God who does miracles. And it ends back to the trajectory that Shula was pointing to with asay. Use your capacity to do. This is the one request, but it's a request of putting up a sign to convince those who aren't faithful to you that my faithfulness is acknowledged by you. In that sense, it's truly back to the word chassid, that loaded word. Chassid Samson Raphael Hirsch will say, is the quality of being a selfless caregiver. For ultimately, and it goes back to Arnold's point earlier, this is a prayer for God to show a sign in order that those who mock him will know that there is indeed God in the world. And yet it's also helping, of course, saving, because we are told that this person praying, perhaps David, is in verse 7, the Yom Tsarati, my day of tsuris, Tsarati, my distress. And so I'll pull this together. I'm so delighted by the reactions. This is a beautiful prayer. And again, I started with that quote of Robert Alter, acknowledging that this is indeed a collage where there's echoes of the Bible and echoes of other Psalms, but how it's woven is very purposeful, and it's woven as an expression of prayer, as in the title. Prayer in which there is a reoccurring sense of devotion to God and seeking God's response to those who taunt, who are the Zadim, the arrogant, against the psalmist, asking for a sign that will put them in their place. And last, whenever we open the ark, we will be echoing verse 8. And so perhaps when we each now sing Ein Kemocha There, there'll be a sense that it's part of a prayer acknowledging God's loyalty. And why is that the prayer? Because the ultimate expression of God's giving nature is the giving of the Torah, a love letter from God. So as we get ready to take out the love letter, we sing and acknowledge, remarkably, God's universality and simultaneously a personal, deeply personal connection to God. With that, I invite those saying Kaddish today. And again, I'll particularly be listening for Phyllis's Kaddish, honoring the year of mourning for her mom, Anne Glatt, passed away July 30th, who, by the way, in terms of honoring Phyllis and her mother worked for much of her life as the office bookkeeper for one of the most admired rabbis in the conservative movement, a rabbi who was distinctly called a Rebbe. That's Rabbi Hilsenroth. So we honor today in our learning Phyllis and by extension her mom, Anne. I invite those observing Kaddish to join together as we recite. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Bi'alma Divra Kirute, V'yamliach Malchute, V'chayechon Uvyomechon, Uvchayei B'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala Uvitman Parim, Imru Amen. Yehei Rabbah Mevorach, Le'olam Le'olmaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shemei L'Kedusha Baruch, Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata, Tushbechata V'Nechemata, Damiran V'Yoma V'Muameh.
Amen.
Yehei Shlama Rabbah Min Shemaya, V'Chayim Aleinu V'Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Romav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'Kol Yisrael V'Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'Imru Amen. Thank you each for putting wind in my sails, for learning together today's Psalm 86. Tomorrow is Psalm 87, a very short psalm, only 7 short verses. Adonai loves the gates of Zion, a pain to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So again, we honor today Phyllis. We look tomorrow to honor Shelby. If any of you have a special occasion that you would like study to be linked to, do let me know. Tomorrow, same time, same place, Psalm 87. Have a good day.
So